Hi everyone. So this is the pre-reading video for A Raisin in the Sun. I said that I'd wanted to do some of this pre-reading in class yesterday, but instead I gave you time to work on some of your assignments. So we're going to do that here. And I just want to kind of give you a little bit of background about the play, a little background about the time period of the play. And just talk you through some of the things we see in the opening scenes here. As you can see, it was first first produced in the 1950s, 1959. These were the original cast members. In the movie version that I've given you, some of these are the same people who were originally on Broadway in New York on the stage doing this. So Ruby Dee was Ruth Younger. Sidney Poitier, you see, was Walter Younger. That's a different person. That's a different person. Ivan Dixon and Louis Gossett Jr. They're in that movie version as well. So they were in the original version when it was a play, when you could go, in Broadway in New York City, and you could watch it in 1959. They were actually in it, and some of those same people are in the movie version that I've showed you some clips from. So just wanted to give you that kind of historical thing about that. Um, and It says in here the action of the play is set in Chicago's South Side, time between World War II and the present. Now, since the play takes place it was produced in 1959, right? Since that's when it was actually on Broadway. When they say between World War II and the present, they're meaning again between like 1945 and the late 1950s, right? So mainly the 1950s is the main kind of era that's going to be taking place in. And so you have to keep that in mind when you're watching the play. I mean, this is a time when there was still going to be legalized segregation in the South. It's when in Chicago in the North, you don't necessarily have the same legalized segregation. That is, you don't have situations where blacks can't, ride in the front of buses, or when you have school systems that are legally segregated and things like you have in the South. But there's a much more kind of an unofficial kind of a segregation. It's not necessarily done by the law saying black people can't do this, which is what you had happening in the South. It's going to be done in other ways, and so it's still going to be a great deal of segregation. This time period, by the way, by the time we get up into the 1950s, and historically is going to be referenced in the play, comes at the tail end of what's called the Great Migration. And that's an important thing to keep in mind, just to know historically that there was this thing called the Great Migration, and a lot of literature comes out of that. Bambara's story, The Lesson, is a story that comes out of the Great Migration as well. What the Great Migration is, it's when you had the descendants of slaves in the South. Most black people lived in the South from the late 1800s onto the early 1900s. Most black people lived in the South. There were almost no black people in New York up until the early 20th century, which is kind of funny to think about. There's a lot of black people in New York now. Where did they all come from? A lot of them came from the South. And the reason they came from the South is that the South had, as we said, that kind of legalized segregation, and not only legalized segregation, a terror campaign. There were blacks could be lynched. A lot of violence would be unleashed against blacks in the South. It was dangerous for black people to actually live in the South. In the late 1800s, early 1900s. And so they said, well, let's move north. Again, north is still going to be segregated in a lot of ways, but not in the same way. You aren't going to have the same level of violence against blacks. You aren't going to have the same kind of denial of opportunities that you have against blacks. I mean, again, not to say that those weren't issues in the North as well, but it was a lot better in the North. And so what happened? People move from the South to the North. Again, 100 or so years ago, there weren't a lot of black people in New York. There weren't a lot of black people in Chicago. Weren't a lot of black people in Boston. Places where there's a lot of black people now in the North. Those places, Philadelphia, there were not black people there. They all came up from the South. And so it's an important thing you run into in a lot of literature, that is something that a historical event that matters, right? Because if you're going to look at what's happening throughout the North at that time period, these are people who are going to have their roots in the South, and that's going to be mentioned in some place in the play. So kind of keep that in mind that that time period is going to matter here. This is a family that has roots in the South. They left the South for some specific reasons. Also, one thing to know about this play is that it's based on some true events. The author actually experienced some of these kinds of things. Her family was actually involved in a lawsuit with trying to buy a house in Chicago. Lorraine Hansberry is the author. Her father had some issues trying to buy a house in Chicago, trying to move into a white neighborhood, and legally they were coming up with some issues there. So that might be important to keep in mind as well. So you see that we have 3 acts in here. Acts are just sections of the play. So a big section, Act 1, is Friday morning, and the following morning, Act 2, later the same day, Friday night, moving day a week later, and then Act 3 an hour later. And so we can think that these acts kind of, there's, even though the time period kind of crosses, that some of them might be in the same day, there's still a sense in which the first act says, look, here's one big chunk of something. You can understand that, when you watch a television show that has commercial breaks, an act is kind of like, this is what happened before the commercial break, and there's something at the end that kind of says, oh, this kind of ends, but we're going to pick up with it on the after that. So you can almost think about these acts as functioning in that same way. So let's go through and read some of what we have in here, Act 1, Scene 1. And what we have here at the beginning is a description of the of what the house is like, and kind of our understanding of the scene, the setting. And that's going to help us kind of piece together some things here, right? And so these are things you might not necessarily read when you see the play, but the people who put the play on read this and then go, how do we want to decorate the apartment, right? How do we want to set up the stage in a certain way? How does it tell us something about how some of the actors are behaving? And so let's see what Hansberry had here. She says, the younger living room would be a comfortable and well ordered room if it were not for a number of indestructible contradictions to this state of being, right? So it'd be comfortable and well ordered, but there's something else going on that's keeping it from being comfortable and well ordered. Its furnishings are typical feature now is that they have clearly had to accommodate the living of too many people for too many years, and they are tired. A metaphor here about talking about the furniture almost like it's a person, but say that this is furniture that's worn out, it's old, right? And you get the sense that these are people maybe who maybe cannot afford to buy better furniture. Still, we can see that at some time, a time probably no longer remembered by the family, except perhaps for Mama, the furnishings of this room were actually selected with care and love and even hope, and brought to this apartment and arranged with taste and pride. So again, just to understand something about how this is set up. These are people who are not necessarily wealthy. This furniture is going to be old, but there's still a certain, as using this word pride here, it's not like it's just ramshackle. It's not like we just threw a bunch of stuff in here. It's just, again, old, and this is a family who's, again, might be having some economic difficulties, but they would like to have the house look nice. That's going to matter in terms of what's going to happen here. That was a long time ago. That was time when they had taste and that kind of taste and pride. Now the once loved pattern of the couch upholstery has to fight to show itself from crocheted doilies and couch covers, which of themselves finally come to be more important than the upholstery. So they had to put the upholstery started to wear out, and so you got to put covers on it, and it's more important than the upholstery because the upholstery is so worn out. And here a table or chair has been moved to disguise the worn places in the carpet. But the carpet is fought back by showing its weakness with depressing uniformity elsewhere on its surface, right? So the idea that the carpets are worn, they're trying to hide that fact. Again, the people who may not have a lot of money but still try and have some pride to try and make things look better. One in this room. Right, it's an interesting idea that, I mean, again, these are all metaphors that she has here because weariness can't win, right? Again, the idea of things being worn out, that can't win, actually. It's a metaphor. It's making it sound like they're people, but that gives us a sense of what's going on there. I mean, this idea that it almost seems like furniture being worn out is like a person, right? It's something that you have to do battle with. Everything has been polished, washed, sat on, used, scrubbed too often. All pretenses but living itself have long since vanished from the very atmosphere of the room, right? So all they can do is live, not the idea of trying to make this thing look nice. They just just kind of get through the day. This room, for it is not really a room unto itself, though the landlord's lease would make it seem so, slopes backward to provide a small kitchen area where the family prepares the meals that are eaten in the living room proper, which must also serve as dining room. The single window that has been provided for these two rooms is located in the kitchen area. The sole natural light the family may enjoy in the course of the day is only that which fights its way through this little window. So again, we're getting a sense of what this place looks like. Right? I mean, it's definitely not the greatest apartment. That's going to matter here because this is a play about getting a different house, right? And you can see why they might not want to live here anymore. At left, a door leads to a bedroom which is shared by Mama and her daughter Benitha. At right, opposite, is a second room, which at the beginning of the life of this apartment was probably a breakfast room, which serves as a bedroom for Walter and his wife Ruth. Right, so again, it used to be, they're just a really a one-bedroom apartment. They've turned it into a two-bedroom apartment by sleeping over there, and and you can see that Mama and her daughter have to share a bedroom. Um, and we say the time, as we said, between World War II and the present. Chicago's South Side. It says at rise. That is when the curtain rise. That's what at rise means, when the curtain rises up and the play begins. It is morning, dark in the living room. Travis, that's the boy, that's going to be Ruth and Walter's son. Travis is asleep on the make down bed at the center. So we've got somebody that we had to make a two bedroom, and then he's sleeping on the couch. An alarm clock sounds from within the bedroom at right, and presently Ruth enters from that room and closes the door behind her. She crosses sleepily towards the window. As she passes her sleeping son, she reaches down and shakes him a little. At the window, she raises the shade, and a dusky south side morning light comes in feebly. She fills a pot with water and puts it on to boil. She calls to the boy in a muffled voice. Ruth is about 30. We can see that she was a pretty girl, even exceptionally so, but now it is apparent that life has been little that she expected, and disappointment has already begun to hang on her face. So, again, we have a description about what the character is supposed to look like. So, we should be imagining something about who she is. She's pretty, but life has worn her down some. In a few years, before 35 even, she will be what be known among her people as a settled woman. That is somebody who's just kind of like middle aged, right? She crosses to her son and gives him a good final rousing shake. So Ruth says, "Come on now, boy, it's 7:30." Right. Her son sits up in his last stupor of sleepiness. I say, "Hurry up, Travis. You ain't the only person in the world got to use a bathroom." So you'll see one of the things they're going to be talking about here is that they share a bathroom in the apartment building. They don't actually have a bathroom in their apartment. Before we passed certain laws that made it so that you couldn't rent an apartment without a bathroom. That was a common thing for people to have. They would have to go down the hall to be able to use the bathroom. And so they have to share the bathroom with other people in the apartment building. And again, you can see why this is a play about people wanting to move, right? Because there's some problems here. We describe him. I'm going to skip over this, just describe him, but it talks about how the bathroom in the outside hall, which is shared by other families. Um, and then she's calling Walter Lee. It's after 7:30. Let me see you do some waking up in there now. And then she waits. You better get up from here, man. It's after 7:30, I tell you. Um, and then she says again, "All right, you just go ahead and lay there, and the next thing you know, Travis will be finished, and Mr. Johnson will be in there, and you'll be fussing and cussing around here like a madman, and late too." So you can think about why the play begins here. We want to be able to see something about how they've got some problems living in the apartment, and that kind of waking up in the morning and negotiating that we've got the son has to sleep in the living room, that they've got to share a bathroom with other people, and think about waking up. I mean, just the stress of just from the second they wake up in the morning, those are things they have to deal with. And again, this is a play about potentially buying a house, right? we won't know that for a while, but I'm just going to let you know that that becomes something that they're going to be dealing with.